Welcome to Dreammakers, candid conversations with women that will change the way that you see success, purpose, and what it takes to bridge the two. I'm Neha Sampat, a 3-time tech founder and CEO with a focus on companies that are places to dream big, build up, and be a good human. I'm CEO of Contentstack and also a certified sommelier. So yes, we drink wine here. I'm joined today by Jen Root, the co-founder and CMO of Manifest Commerce, a sustainable logistics solution for retailers. In her words, they help clients green their whole supply chain. Today, we're going to talk about building businesses for good, storytelling, and a realistic approach to changing the world. Let's get started. Hi, Jen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So I'd love for you to start with one of your favorite stories. And we had talked about this earlier. Tell us about what your mom taught you about changing the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So my mother was very much an inspiration to me growing up, and still is like my words of encouragement and my biggest cheerleader. So everyone always asks, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was always, well, I want to change the world. And, my mom would always joke and be like, well, Jenny, you better get to work because there's a lot of work to do. That's one big feat. Better get to work. So, I think that's really something that like kind of shook me into gear and, led me in the right direction.
It helped you focus on a specific cause, or at least to bite off a piece of a bigger problem.
Yeah. And, she was always, very like, all right, that's good. Well, better get to it, and that's just always been her approach to things. Michael Jackson's Heal the World was like a popular song. Yeah. And like those lyrics are so good. It's like, heal the world, make it a better place. Yeah. And then the next line, you remember the next line?
For you and for me.
For you and for me, and for the entire human race. Yeah. Like, it's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. And, things were a little like rough and, like there was a lot going on back then. There's a lot going on now. And that was a big part of kind of an eye-opener as a child through like pop culture. There was still like a lens through the media and through pop culture. But I was like, wow, this is going on in the world, and like, what can I do to make a difference? So that would always be my answer, is like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know I want to change the world. Don't know what that means, but that's, what I want to do and how I want to approach business.
And you've obviously started to do that in more ways than one, and we'll get into some of that. But let's start with the wine. So I have a bottle of 2021 Duckhorn Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc. Duckhorn, great vineyard. We actually do a lot of work with them at Contentstack. They host some of our events. Nice. And if you've seen Decoy at the grocery store, it's like the little brother or little sister to Duckhorn. So it's kind of their one step down from a Duckhorn. But this is a really nice, easy to drink, simple wine, great for an afternoon. And what I typically get in these, I mean, Sauvignon Blanc in general, you always get some of that acidity, the lemon, and sometimes pineapple. But this one, actually, I get a little bit of grapefruit and definitely pineapple's coming across too, maybe a little passion fruit.
I do smell that passion fruit.
Yeah.
That's good.
Nice. It's nice and fresh. Cheers. 2021, so very new. Very young.
That is nice. That has a little like citrus to it or something too. That's good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can tell when there's a lot of acidity in a wine, that salivation that happens on the two sides of your mouth, you can tell it's an acidic wine, and it usually goes well with acidic foods. And you want to kind of cut through the acidity with something that's acidic. But this is one of my favorite go-tos for an afternoon wine, and accessible because being in the US, it's pretty easy to get a hold of it.
Yeah, that's good. So what would you recommend pairing it with? Like something acidic, like what about with a chocolate or something?
Usually, so because of the acidity, I would do less of the sweet and maybe something, maybe like a really nice cheese that cuts through that acid. You could do something like if you wanted to do something sweet, you could do like a citrusy sweet, like a lemon tart or something like that. Because acid and acid tend to go well together.
Nice.
When you have like the red acidic wines, it goes well with like a red sauce, like a tomato sauce, because of the acidity that comes through in a tomato.
Oh, I never knew that. Very cool. All right. Well, I'll break out the cheeses later then.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about your exposure to entrepreneurship. And at a very early age, and you kind of talked about it a bit, you were exposed to the concept of environmental sustainability. And your father had a business that you were exposed to as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it inspired you?
Yeah. So my father was in construction pretty much his whole adult life. Prior to that, from South Jersey, he was a mushroom farmer. So, there was this like very interesting kind of like two different career paths happening. He was a farmer, grew up in like Amish country, basically rural Pennsylvania. Yeah. Then got into engineering and construction and took that career path and eventually started a concrete company called American Concrete. And we were a very connected family. We would sit down and have dinner every single night and, talk about our day and all of that. And I very fondly remember him talking about his work doing like concrete and construction around a lot of like our wetlands and preservation and restoration, reforestation, that type of work. Because what would happen as his company grew, they would start to, work on roads or work on asphalt and have to do a lot of work where they're like the Delaware River comes through and there's like marsh and swamp and cranberry bogs and blueberry fields. And like people think of Jersey and they think of like Jersey Shore and like North Jersey and everything, but it's the Garden State. There's a whole biodiverse, like South Jersey farmland. It's all rural. So what he would do essentially is where they could, they would avoid, doing anything with any protected, if it was protected, they couldn't do it. But there is like so much land that they would have to build through it sometimes, but they would recreate it. So they would basically do, if they take out this, they have to rebuild this. So if there was any, like any type of, like they had to pave something, then whatever they affected there, they would have to rebuild exactly the same type of environment somewhere else. So there was a lot of preservation happening. And we also grew up doing a lot of gardening and like learning how to like work the land and farm and stuff like that. We would grow like corn and eggplants and tomatoes and all kinds of stuff growing up. So it was very interesting because like construction and farming like don't seem to go hand in hand. But like the biggest lesson really like growing up was like, okay, yeah, if we do something and affect the land here, then we have to make sure that we're repairing it. So it was kind of like, what a lot of the large reforestation projects are doing on a smaller scale in South Jersey, in the wetland area there.
That's super interesting. It's like when we were talking about Michael Jackson, it's heal the world, right? If you break something, fix it. If you do something, undo it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's responsibility and it's like accountability. And, I think we need more of that. So those lessons were very apparent early on from my household and from my father specifically.
That's awesome. Well, why don't you level set with us a little bit and paint the picture of what a dirty supply chain really looks like? And what does it, transforming that to something green? What is that? What's the difference? What does that look like? Teach us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's our mission. Like at Manifest Commerce, we're really looking under the hood of the supply chain and looking at how we can forge partnerships to essentially green the whole supply chain all the way through. And in a lot of cases, there's a circular economy that can be created. Now, our piece of the puzzle, we do fulfillment. So, if a merchant or a brand is selling products online or selling in omnichannel in Nordstrom and Macy's, then we'll do the order distribution to those B2B facilities, and we'll also do the order distribution to the customer. Now there's carbon emissions that happen across the board there for that process. There's also plastics that are in packaging that, like when 2020 e-com boom happened because of COVID, everybody was at home. 40% spike in e-commerce. There was also like 295 million tons of waste that was created from packaging. A lot of that is plastic, 60% of that takes over 500 years to biodegrade. And plastics, now they can affect waterways, they can affect ecosystems. You see these pictures of like baby turtles with like straws in their noses and stuff like that. Like that's real, that's happening. There's something called a Pacific garbage patch that is right off the coast of San Diego that we can take our drone and we can fly, and we can see it. We can see it out there. There are 5 different cycles of trash that are just like circulating in our ocean. Wow. And there's animals that live there. We farm our food from there. There's fish farms that are there where we're getting tuna. Like back in the day, it's like a fish gets caught in a net and it dies and it's not sustainable. These are line caught. Let me make sure Liam has a key to get in. I think he's home. 1 second, please hold.
BRB.
Yeah. Hey. Thank you. Bye.
Sorry, I forgot my keys.
Oh no, that's okay. It's pre-recorded. It's being recorded and not live anyway. So.
Hi, Liam.
Hello.
Want to say hello?
Sure, I'll say hello.
How was school?
This is my Liam.
Hello.
Hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So it's just like it's a hot mess the way that things are being managed now, and it's almost like, is it too late? Like, is there time? There's like, it's up in the air. Like, it depends who you talk to. Like an environmentalist could be like, it's too late, we're doomed, and then it's like, well, wait, things are still, if there's still growth happening, and like if we're still able to farm, like that's a telltale sign that it's going to be okay. And we can kind of like shift. I feel a sneeze coming.
I'm having an allergic reaction on my nose. So if my nose is red, that's what's going on.
Oh, do you think it's from the wine?
I don't think I'm allergic to wine.
That would be bad. I'm going to drink this green stuff and see if it will help me to not sneeze. Cause I was thinking that too, when I took a sip of the wine, it like made my nose itch. But anyway, so
you were also talking about like how you can transform it into something more green. Like what's that look like?
Yeah. So when we think of the supply chain as a whole, we think about where product starts from. Like for us, retail supply chain, it starts with manufacturing and the making of products. So, something is made, it's created. That's like over 800 million tons of carbon per year on average for like retail manufacturing. Then, all of that product, say it's manufactured in China. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, that's where a lot of product is made. Then it sits on an ocean freight and it works its way over to the United States, typically through the port of Long Beach. There's a port in Texas, there's a port in Savannah. We got ports all over. But, you see these ocean freights that are lined up waiting because there's labor shortages, there's supply chain strain, like, you hear it in the news all the time. So that ocean freight, there's something called marine carbon and it's black carbon. That is bad. So like, in addition to the Pacific garbage patch and all that garbage that's floating around, this marine ocean freight, like black carbon, that's like another like 18 tons, like some, crazy amount of carbon. But there's like maritime coalitions and there's different ocean freight liners that are green. So there's alternatives that exist. But a lot of times a company is just like operating on autopilot. They don't know that those solutions exist. So it's just a lack of knowledge. It's not like, and it's just how we've done things. It's like, oh, we've always done things that way, kind of thing. And then port, there's a lot of port cities. Typically the air is not as clean in those port cities. And then container freight, that's another part of the supply chain. Warehousing, and like that's where we take over, is the warehousing. So then the goods finally make it to the warehouse, the orders come in, and then that's when stuff gets distributed. So as far as like the cleaner way to do that, there's manufacturers that are recreating products from ocean-bound plastics. So we work with a manufacturer called Platform 88 that does a lot of like upcycling for Starbucks cups. And they create barbecue utensils out of used Starbucks cups. They're just as strong, they work just as good, and they create a number of reusable, like upcycled plastic. There's plenty of plastic in the world. We don't need to create anymore. So that's the solution in manufacturing. Now, not every merchant, not every procurement person, not every supply chain director knows about these, little pockets of kind of green savings that exist in the supply chain. So, you think ocean freight, Maersk has a whole green line that exists that is sustainable, that they're checking all the boxes when it comes to like ESG, but not everybody knows that exists. So it's just a matter of like education and, once awareness. Awareness. And we vote with our dollars. So the more we start like shifting towards sustainable practices as consumers, it'll like shift the supply chain and shift those merchants into that direction too.
Yeah, absolutely. You were talking about the origin of manifest commerce as it's something that you kind of fell into. And I think you actually said, oh, I guess we're building a business. Share that story with us.
Yeah. So my business partner, George. So George Wojciechowski, he's the co-founder of ShipBob. Now, ShipBob is one of the largest 3PLs that, they were founded in like 2014 and, built so quickly. I partnered with George on some e-commerce strategy projects that I was doing in the agency world. So, I have a background in e-commerce strategy, growth strategy, and that's always parallel pathed my like humanitarian sustainability projects, like all the stuff that I've ever done for personal. And then sometimes those projects, yield income or another revenue stream or something. But George was a key partner of mine when I was in the agency world. And he left ShipBob, I guess it was like winter of last year. Maybe that was 2020 now. I don't even remember like when it was. But when he was leaving, I was also leaving the agency project, and we worked, well together as partners. I would work with the brand on growth. I would refer them to George to do the fulfillment and the warehousing, distribution, all of that. Now, I messaged him. I was like, hey, I'm leaving. I'm going into consulting. I'm working on a couple of humanitarian projects. Please keep in touch. Always enjoyed working with you. Here's my personal cell, personal email, blah, blah, blah. Within like minutes, he's like, I'm leaving ShipBob and like was just about to send you a message. Like,
oh, wow.
So it's like what I like to think of as, are you familiar with the term kismet?
Yes.
Yeah. It's just like when that like blessing or that moment happens and you're like, what?
It's meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, we're like, oh, it's because we call the business manifest, like a ship manifest, that's your like waiting. So it's like manifest destiny, it's
That's
like
so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes things just manifest into reality too when you start to think of them or you write them down, or we've talked about that on this podcast before too.
100%. That's part of dream making, essentially. If you can think it, you can do it. It starts as a thought. It starts as an idea.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So happy accident.
Happy accident. In reality, your journey to this business, to Manifest Commerce, was a result of this whole common thread throughout your life, and you always knew your values. What you've kind of touched on this, but what would you say is your purpose?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I believe that there is like potential for like change and transformation for challenges that we're facing as individuals, for challenges that we're facing as an economy, for challenges that we're facing as a community. Like, I believe that there's nothing that's like unsolvable by putting, really good people on a project like together. So I think, my purpose really is to bring people together to solve big problems, and to have fun while doing it. Like when we were prepping for this show today, I was joking with your team. There's a quote from E.B. White that I just love. Yeah. And, E.B. White is the mind behind Charlotte's Web, which is like such an endearing story. I cry every time still, like a baby. But he says that he wakes up every morning determined to have one hell of a good time and to change the world. And it makes planning his day very difficult. And
That's awesome.
I can remember being like, that is me. But also, it doesn't have to make planning your day difficult. What if you just combine the two? What if you do what you love, make a difference, make an impact, and have fun while doing it?
Absolutely.
It's possible.
That's awesome. We talk about at Contentstack, we have this whole concept of one team, one dream. And every now and then someone will call me on it and say, well, what's the dream? And I always say, outside of all the product stuff, it's about kicking ass, having fun, building a high performing team and product, right? It's the journey and enjoying the journey, but knowing that you're impacting people's lives along the way. And I think it's just so important. Like, we have such a limited time here that you have to do something impactful and significant as a part of all the hard work that you put in.
100%. I agree 100%. Yeah. And we might as well have fun while we're doing it.
Totally. Where are you today in your quest to green the chain?
Oh, that's a good question. So, we're very much in this startup phase at our business where we're like ramping and growing quickly. So there's a lot of we trip over something and then we're like, oh my gosh, okay, that's not going to work operationally. We need to fix that. Because, you can plan for so much, but it's the ability to like pivot, and dance in the moment when something happens to really be able to grow. So we've had very quick growth, very good traction. As far as greening the supply chain, when we look at the portion that we are in control of, we're looking at we're doing projects like reforestation projects in the Amazon. So that's part of the mission and part of the journey to green the supply chain. These things are a challenge to measure. Like, carbon is measured in pounds. And when you do a reforestation project, it's not like one tree gets rid of that carbon, because the carbon has already been exposed into the environment. So you're offsetting the carbon. Mm-hmm. So there's also this proactive approach now that we're looking at to introduce biofuels as part of the last mile delivery service. How do we make that part of the norm and part of the general offering for like shipping? Like, is it integration in your shipping platform and your shipping choice? Yes, you choose biofuels, and then the consumer, has the extra cost or extra charge type of piece. So we're looking at the pieces that like we can control today, like zero plastics in all of our packaging. Like there's no plastics in anything that we do. And tape, like tape is is an offender, is an earth offender.
Yeah.
We're doing water soluble tapes. There's alternatives. So, they'll break down, they'll return to the earth, and it won't affect, anything. So really those are the biggest ways now. The carbon offsets, with the planning towards, offering different alternatives for biofuels and working with carriers that are doing that. But it's all about partnerships. Like the way we think about it is like a rising tide lifts all boats, and we're all different cogs in the supply chain wheel. So how do we all come together and, create solutions as a whole? Because the power of many, is very much like you mentioned, like one team, one dream. Like,
yeah, for sure.
we're all working towards together.
It's a ginormous problem. It's not something that one company or one team can solve. It needs to be an effort that many forces are behind. What areas do you have to combat resistance, like, from potential retails or other prospects that you're talking to? Like, where do you run into resistance?
Yeah. So a lot of the resistance is in the resistance to change.
Status quo. Always that. Like, challenge status quo. Yeah.
Always 100%. And it's like, okay, all right. It's like, we're coming in like, right. Like our costs, we are not more expensive. That's like sometimes one of those misconceptions is like, if we're doing this sustainably, it's got to cost more, right? Don't the materials cost more? But no, that's not the case. We've found ways to really like mitigate costs and offset costs in other areas. Like we have robotics in the warehouse, so that helps with labor significantly. And that also helps with energy savings significantly. So, the cost piece isn't an issue. That's usually like, if someone's not moving forward, it's like, what are they? It's like BANT or something, is that it's like budget authority, whatever the N stands for in time.
Yeah.
But none of those things are really barriers of entry for us. The biggest piece is something is working well and it's working good enough. Stuff's moving and shaking on its way to consumers, and they don't want to pull that plug because our piece is an important part.
I imagine it's a big mindset shift. And if there's not an incentive that isn't potentially monetary, there might not be a reason to do it or to make the shift. And it's, I guess, partially a lot about just education. Like if you have it in your soul to do good and to make the world better, but not everybody has that thread. And it's a lot about just convincing and educating and shifting that mindset.
Yeah, 100%. And then it comes down to branding too. So like there's brands that are 100% sustainable, like in and out. Like you look at like the Toms of the world, the Patagonias of the world. The founder of Patagonia is the CEO of 1% for the Planet. And we're a part of that organization. 1% of our profits goes back to environmental initiatives.
Awesome.
Now, if the Toms and the Patagonias of the world are thinking like this, they don't want their product getting shipped to their customers with tape. And, sometimes you see like a tiny little like lipstick in a box this big and stuff like that. Like it's a part of their brand integrity and a part of like, people are buying and making a choice to buy something that is sustainable. And
those are the change makers that are paving the path and like really showing that it's possible and that it's good and it's good for business too.
Absolutely. And that's our natural market, that's our natural market. Now we're not working with those big brands as of yet. We're still very much in growth mode, but there are a lot of brands that are moving and shaking, like Thousand Fell shoes. They're awesome. They have like an upcycling component to them where you only need one pair of sneakers. After your sneakers are beat up, you send them back, they break them down, they make a new pair of sneakers.
That's
And
really
they're doing gangbusters. They're in Bloomingdale's. They're starting to take off online. So we have a lot of customers like that are like starting to rise above the status quo and really starting to make some noise and like wave green flags. So it's been a fun journey. So resistance really is in the, desire to change. What's something that's already working good enough for a brand.
And settling, really.
Yeah.
So Manifest Commerce isn't your first company. You've kind of have this common thread of doing good and making change and pushing things forward. And you've started a couple. So tell us a little bit more about those other do good companies.
Yeah. So my first business, I had a cosmetics line in Hawaii. It was called Lady B Cosmetics. And it was sourced from like all natural materials and everything. I did some work with Dior for quite a bit. So like I learned, like kind of what was in stuff and how to formulate stuff. And, we did well. We had a good wholesale business going. But really the main thread there was like what it means to be a lady, what it means to be a woman, like that, kind of like, like girl power kind of thing. But beyond that, like, creating a good living for yourself, how to be independent, how to learn like life skills, these kind of things. So that cosmetics company was like deeply rooted in those beliefs. And I would do a lot of work with like the YWCA there. There was like a resume building program and like building like clothing donations for like women that say were in an abusive home, putting the resumes together, working on getting a new job. This is how you do your makeup. This is how you dress. Here's how you put your resume together. So these kind of things. So that was like kind of the first venture that I did on my own. And then also in Hawaii, I became interested in the news and media. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I don't watch the news anymore. I scroll to make sure the world's not going to blow up that day or that, there's no weird weather or anything. And then I'm like, okay, what's going on. It's not good, but what can I do? I can do this piece of it. So the second company was a media program. It was called Under the Rainbow. And we would share the good news of the community, people that were giving back, people that were making a difference. And it was more just like a community, kind of gathering like, okay, what are the real pressing issues that are affecting Hawaii today? And that was homelessness. So there was like a homelessness challenge that was happening. So we were looking at like rehabilitation for the homeless. How do we get these guys back on their feet to create a sustainable life for themselves? And as part of that too, like working with the local shelters, et cetera. So it was kind of like double threaded with philanthropy and news. The news portion of it didn't really like take off, but the philanthropy part did, and the support part did, which was the most important piece. And then when I moved to San Diego, I ended up starting a news publication here as well called Del Mar Lifestyle, local publication. As part of that too, we did a radio show, and that was more business focused. People that were giving back in the business community, making a difference, sharing, getting the awareness out. And that was the business that did well. And I ended up selling back in 2017 and ended up going into consulting, advising, and, all of that after that. So it's still in circulation. It's a paper magazine. It's
awesome.
36 pages.
You had no background in media really, and you just kind of jumped in and tried to figure it out because it was a passion.
I was like, I've always wanted to do this. Why not?
And it's interesting because it comes back to telling stories about philanthropy, about what's going on in a neighborhood, in a community. Why is telling those stories so important to society?
Well, I mean, I think it's like inspiration. Like if you think about, somebody who, it's a dream maker thing. If someone has a dream and they are like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. And I feel like it could really make a difference, but like, I'm here. How do I get from like here to here?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like? So it's like that spark of inspiration, or like, that little bit of like hope that makes you feel like you light up. Like, when you're doing something, you feel like you just kind of like bloom inside for a minute. And you're like, whew, like that's your whole soul telling you to like bloom and lean into that, So encouraging others to hear that, acknowledge that, and then what do you do with that? So like,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do something. It's like the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, it's the call to greatness. It's the call to greatness. Okay. So like the call's there, you gonna answer? Cause like that phone could just keep on ringing forever.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything. You can sit and, cause some people are okay with being okay, and that's okay. So, but my hope is that, it'll inspire those that do want to transform, or do want to move that energy and that desire in a way towards action. We'll know that it's possible.
That goes back to your childhood conversations with your mom when you said you want to change the world, but this adds like that reality to it. Like, what does that mean, and how much impact can I have? And how do I choose something and take some action to actually start to move the needle in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, she's funny. Like, I would say that and she'd be like, okay, Jenny, well, you better get started. There's a lot of work to do, and that's kind of how she would talk about cleaning the house too. Like, you better get started. There's a lot of work to do. Like, just sit around and talk about it, or you're going to do something.
So you also studied musical theater in college, and that probably played a role in your view of the world and storytelling and all of that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I studied musical theater, all through high school, even back to when I was like 12. I started singing at a very young age, playing piano also. My vocal coach was on Broadway with Carol Burnett. She had done like Once Upon a Mattress, like her whole music studio was like pictures of her and Carol Burnett, like her dressed like a bird. She was like this caged bird in it. And like Carol Burnett was like in this big bonnet. And I was like, oh, so I got really into Carol Burnett as a young woman too. And I was like, oh, I like what she's got going on. Like, I'm inspired by this woman. So, that kind of paved the way for me too, of like how I showed up as an individual. And then just really love music. So, I sing in a band and, do some stuff here and there with like jazz clubs here. But studying musical theater, when it came time to like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? When like that actually happened and I was going to college, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't think I can like survive in the real world by just like being like I had no real, you graduate high school. What do you know really? So I was like, all right, cool. I know that I've been singing, I've been doing musical theater. I had the lead in like some of the plays there and stuff like that in high school. So I studied musical theater. And then I'm like, what am I going to do with the degree in musical theater? So I switched to psychology, and then I switched to sociology, and then I switched to anthropology, and then still like moonlit as a musical theater, person, because I loved it. But really like, it's still a part of me. I still do like improv and stuff like that. And I think the biggest and the best and most fun role, I played Frenchie in a rendition of Grease, and we did like a little tour in the Northeast. And it was like the kind of shape shifting, because I wore like a different wig in each thing. I was like, oh, this is fun. I could have pink hair and then blonde hair. And then, so it was the ability really like to dance in the moment. Like, that's really what I learned is like, you could be doing something and, then all of a sudden, this happens. And it's like, okay. Like in improv, we call it yes and. Yes, so you fall into the moment and you're like, all right, well, we're here now. So what are we going to, okay, well, we're here now. So what are we going to do? So the ability to like dance in the moment and be like flexible, agile, I think like the emotional intelligence that I learned from like auditioning and, getting rejected for stuff and all of that. It builds grit.
It totally does. Yeah. And it's cool that you've also figured out a way to keep something that you're so passionate about incorporated into your life, being in a band and being in theater and being involved in the community that way. I'm similar with wine. Like I spent a lot of time studying it, but I never intended to do that as my day job. But I love that I can bring it into my life and still have it as a part of it.
That's so awesome. Cheers to that.
Cheers to that. So we talked about this a little bit right when we were, before we even started recording, but it's doing good has become such an important topic for businesses today. And what I've found, at least at Contentstack, is that when we're attracting talent, they actually care that the companies are doing good and that there's values that they can align with. And for us, that's been a competitive advantage because it's always been just a part of who we are. But I'm curious what you think. Like, is that a trend? Is it a millennial thing, or is it here to stay?
I think it's here to stay. There's a lot of shifts and a lot of movement that needs to happen to make it stick. But I think we're trending in the right direction. Like when you look at global trends and you look at where 40% of commerce is happening, it's happening from that millennial age group. So 40% of this age group now, as you mentioned, they're looking at careers. They're looking at what that long-term decision is that's going to, get them to where they want to be professionally. They're making their buying choices based on sustainability. So 40% of that age group, they're buying product based on, is it good for the environment? Is there a social justice element to this? Like they deeply care about the world and what's going on in the world. And, I don't blame them. Look at like what's going on, it's like, okay, yeah. So yeah. They're the groups that are like, let's do something here. And I want to support other folks that are doing something. So it's no surprise that they're vetting their career choices in that way too.
It's so awesome that we can kind of place a bet on that generation because we need them to step up because let's face it, our generation didn't do as much as they should have, or we should have. So
yeah, I mean, like Liam's 14, he's in 8th grade. And, he is like very much in tune about like what's going on with like monkeys, chimpanzees, like ecosystems in like the jungle. Like he's like super interested in that. And then he will create something and be like, I think I found a way to have like perpetual energy come through like a water mill, and like drew this whole thing. And I'm like, wow, okay, well,
that's awesome. I'm sure you've had a little bit of influence on him to think that way too.
Well, like his father too is a scientist and is working on projects in labs a lot. So he's seeing, the like pragmatic physical application of science and like the social application. And then, with this new venture, that's, what he hears all day long is like packaging and biodiversity, like all of it. He's exposed to it. So
awesome.
Okay, he's good. He's the future.
It's exactly. And we have to bet on them and help them be successful. I'm going to move into rapid fire since we're about to run out of time. So I usually ask my guests 4 of the same questions at the end of every show. So I'm going to start with this one. And that is, what is your wake up song?
Depends on the day. But I like, I listen to like Paul Simon a lot in the morning. Like I love like, You Could Call Me Al. I don't know why, it's like upbeat. So like I'll listen to that in the shower. But there's also a song I've been listening to lately called Feel Good by Polo and Pan. It's kind of like ambient, like down tempo, and like the lyrics are just great. So I'll like crank that in the shower in the morning, and that'll be like my rah-rah song. Hey Jude is also a good one.
Oh, Hey Jude's awesome.
Yeah.
Anything Beatles?
Yeah, exactly. Anything Beatles.
If the 19-year-old you asked you today what you should read or what you should listen to, what would you say?
Oh man, 19-year-old Jen was an interesting person. I guess I still am. Probably this, like Ray Dalio, Principles. I don't know if you know his work, but it's really good. He has a really like psychological and, like business view, and talks about principles in work and life. So it's very much in alignment with like building something on purpose. So Ray Dalio, I would recommend for business, but like personally, probably like Philip K. Dick. Like I love sci-fi. He's like Blade Runner, Minority Report. Yeah.
Awesome. Can you recommend a wine?
Whalebone Winery is our latest obsession in the home. They have a wine. It's called Bob. It's like the guy's name is Bob. He's from New Jersey. My dad is named Bob and I'm from New Jersey. So that's probably why I connected with it. But I was like, this is really good. It's like a red blend.
Oh, cool.
And Whalebone Winery, there was like a whole like whale skeleton that was found in the vineyard, and it's out near like Paso Robles area. It's a beautiful, beautiful winery, and the wine is a good red blend.
Awesome. I'll have to check that one out. And the last question, what should our listeners do tomorrow to help them become dream makers?
Ooh, that's a good question. Just keep swimming, just keep going. Like, that's really it. Like, don't give up. Just keep on keeping on and learn every step of the way. Because, you get up, brush yourself off, and you keep on.
Keep on.
I think that's it.
Swimming.
Yeah, just keep swimming.
Good advice, Jen. Thank you. Thank you for all of your authenticity and for sharing your stories and for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Cheers to you.
Cheers.